because that was an issue we had talked about a little bit the previous, in November. Some people had, told me that they didn't know about it and they didn't understand it. So I thought this would be a great opportunity. Since then, the governor's message is that he wants to put clean, get rid of the redevelopment agencies. And so it's kind of changed a little bit, the theme. And so, that's kind of what I want to open it up and have them talk, both of them talk about some of the changes in the redevelopment agency, the tax increment funding that we're still to go forward, what it is, how it affects us, and just anything right now that's at the top of the list that has to do with the budget.
Great.
So, okay.
All right, so this is where I sit here and cheer Kip on. But I guess let me just, before Kip gets started, I was hoping I could just create a little bit of a frame here. The council just met 3 hours ago, as you'll see on the night news, and we decided to do what about 20 other cities have done, which is sort of make a mad grasp at trying to preserve redevelopment money. I had no idea whether or not they'll have any legal effect or not. That'll be up to lawyers and judges ultimately. But we're anticipating there will be some state legislation. That state legislation may be retroactive, in which case everything we do is for naught, if in fact whatever is very illegal. So the bottom line is we really don't know what's going to happen with redevelopment at this point. The governor has given some promising indications in the last couple of days that he may back off a complete elimination of redevelopment, but we just don't know. I would expect that there's going to be a lot of battling over the next few weeks, and we probably won't know for a while. That being said, I think there's a decent probability we'll have redevelopment in some form survive, and that, I guess, really brings us to Kip's presentation.
So, since there is so much going on, well, thank you very much. I'm absolutely surprised and ecstatic, and I love cupcakes. Thank you. Let me talk a little bit about tax increment and how it works and collection in strong neighborhoods. And I'm going to try to keep a very complex subject brief, and then leave space for questions. And then if it makes sense to talk about what we know about the governor's budget proposal, I'd be happy to do that as well. Both of them? Okay. So, in San Jose, we have a number of redevelopment areas. Strong neighborhoods is one. However, at the current time, we do not collect tax increment in strong neighborhoods. We collect tax increment in many of the other redevelopment areas, and primarily from North San Jose. Most of the tax increment comes from the Rincon area in North San Jose. Technically, 3 areas comprise most of the redevelopment funding. So what is tax increment? Tax increment is a way of talking about the growth in property tax from the time that an area becomes a redevelopment. So if this is money, and this is the amount of property tax that you're paying on any given time, that's called the base. And then if it becomes a redevelopment year, over time the theory is property tax values grow. And what the increment is the difference between the base, if you will, and that growth. So this little part right here is the tax increment. Normally that increment would be shared out among the different tax receiving agencies, county, city, school, special districts. With redevelopment, most of that income is now captured for the redevelopment agency, rather than going to county, rather than going to cities, and rather than going to schools. The schools are a little bit more complicated because essentially, formulaically, they get made up for that loss from the state in a way that I'm happy to go into with some complexity if it's useful to understand. But essentially, tax funds that would be going to the county and the city now accumulate to the redevelopment agency, and the state then backfills essentially for any losses, or most of the losses on the school districts. So those extra funds are then taken, and typically they can be spent in 2 ways. They can be just spent on things for redevelopment purpose. First off the top comes 20% for affordable housing, which is used to often referred to as the 20% money. The rest, 80% money, can be used for redevelopment purpose within the redevelopment area for the most part. Sometimes nearby the redevelopment area, but for the most part within the redevelopment area. As I said, at this point, almost all of our financing comes from a couple of tax increment generating areas, mostly North San Jose, some in the Eatonville area. Downtown is also a tax increment generating area, as are the neighborhood business districts, a few of them. Relatively speaking, it's a very small amount of culture. The proposal that has been put forward and is being worked through is to begin to collect tax increment within strong neighborhoods itself. Now, that wouldn't change the amount of tax any individual property owner pays. It would change the way future taxes which are collected are distributed. And would, as I said before for the other areas, mean that rather than going to county and city, school districts, special districts, a significant portion of that would come into the redevelopment agency to be respent within strong neighborhoods and other areas on redevelopment projects, including neighborhood projects, including economic development, including affordable housing. The timeline that we are looking for to make the findings that are necessary for that is we'd like to bring a recommendation with the findings. Every time that you make a change in the redevelopment area, you have to make a new finding of life. We all remember the original finding of life that we went through back in 2002. This would be an update of that, saying yes, there's still a need for redevelopment for these reasons. And we bring a preliminary report out more or less late February, and then information to the agency board, which also has to be the city council, for their consideration and their action in the May timeframe. And then there is some legislative time that needs to pass. Basically, a December needs to pass before you can begin to collect the tax increment. So it won't be until fiscal year 2012, 2013 that we would begin collecting the increment from strong neighborhoods. Now, let me back up a little bit. The reason that this is important for the redevelopment agency, for strong neighborhoods, and for the city is really twofold. One, with the dip in property values, the current tax collecting areas are not able to generate the funds that we had expected from them to be able to do the programs that we wanted. That's where we got the $30 million cut in strong neighborhoods, for example. Two, the large tax collecting areas, North San Jose in particular, sunset. And they sunset in a manner that for the last 10 years of the project, you can only pay off debt and can't accumulate new funding. So starting about 2018, the increment that we're collecting from North San Jose becomes less available to us, and over time not available to us, to spend on redevelopment programs. So if you want to make a graph over time, what would happen is that the funds coming from the strong neighborhoods would start small at first, but then would rise to be the main source of funding for all redevelopment activities in strong neighborhoods and the city. And that's the basic proposal. Now, some of what needs to happen in order for this to work is there ideally needs to be an agreement with the county, because part of why we're in this is to make sure that we can settle some obligations with the county. Those negotiations are ongoing. The other is to make sure that it works for the city as a whole. And what I mean by that is there are implications for the city in losing that tax increment, which obviously we as a whole city are concerned about. So we want to structure our agreement with ourselves and our agreement between the agency and the city in a way that those investments we make in the future support the city and the city's general fund. For example, investments in infrastructure would be something that would work for both parties. An example I've given that many people around the table are familiar with is the work we did in Greater Gardner neighborhood, where you had streets which were sinking into peat bog, you had sewers that weren't working, you had discontinuous sidewalks, and we were able to do street replacement, we were able to complete the sidewalks, put some street trees in, and also do the sewer work at the same time. The result on that is the operations and maintenance costs that the city was paying actually dropped, because they didn't have to go out and try to fill the potholes every 2 weeks. And the property values for the homeowners went up. And the other thing that we saw, and you saw it first on Delma Street, is that people suddenly said, after 10 years of sort of sitting on that property, wow, I have some there's some curb appeal, literally, to my property now. And they invested privately in it, significantly, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Same owners, not new owners. Boom, that whole segment of the street really revitalized. So those types of investments make a lot of sense for redevelopment, they make a lot of sense for the neighborhoods, and they make a lot of sense for the city as opposed to redevelopment. So those are the types of investments, at least on the strong neighborhood side, and a few other examples that we would be encouraging. The types of investments we would expect to see less of are investments that raise the operating costs for the city. So building a new community center without having an operator there. That's not something you're going to see in this day and age. Building a park without having figure out a way that you're going to be able to maintain it is something that's going to be problematic or difficult. So the types of improvements, again, would be, I think the city's recommendation on this would be skewed toward those investments which are important to the neighborhood, but also have kind of a fiscal prudent aspect to them, at least while we're in this period of fiscal crisis. So that's the basic framework of the plan. And I'll stop there with that, and maybe I can go on. Let me know if Sammy uses it.
Questions regarding that?
There's a lot out there, so maybe we should do Q&A on that, or I should turn it over to the Councilmember.
Does anybody have any questions specifically on the
Two. One is, what is would be the impact of the recession on the definition of what is the base value? Because I know my house isn't what it was, and that means you're starting from a very low value potentially.
Yeah, this is actually one of the things that works to the agency's advantage is the base year is actually the year of adoption of the plan, not the year of adoption of the tool of tax increment. So in this case, it is actually 2002 which sets the base.
Okay.
So even though we've all seen some ups and downs between them, for the most part, we've seen ups since.
So bottom line, it would have to increase back to the value it was in 2002 before you would
No, we get to wind the clock back a little bit and go back to what the property value was in 2002 and what it is now. For the most part, it's higher than 2002. And that becomes the increment going forward.
I think Bob's assumption is that it's actually lower now.
Not the 2002 overall
actually,
in the strong neighborhoods area.
Based on what I'm reading in the paper, is the average value for resale in my neighborhood. My house is about $100K lower than what I bought it for.
Right, and remember, average value, average value and assessed value are two different things because of the way Prop 13 causes the lag in property value. So what you have is the only year we've seen a drop in redevelopment property values has been this last year where we had a 7.5% drop. And because if you were reassessed every year, you might be right because you'd have a more fluid property value. Okay. But since you're only reassessed when you sell during a transaction, and there's that 2% inflation factor kind of built in most years, the overall stats for strong neighborhoods are that the tax increment, tax level now is actually significantly higher than it was in 2002.
Just one more question. What would be the impact on a neighborhood if, because of the work that's been done so far, there was not a finding of blight? Would they be dropped?
You know, it's interesting because we sort of are arguing against ourselves in some ways on that. Part of the two sides of the argument are what I find encouraging, and I do have a dog in this hunt, I'll get to my bias, is how much progress has been made in many places over the last 10 years. I mean, it feels different. People engage with each other differently. There are great physical progress. As we look now and are making the argument for finding a light this time around, part of what we are focusing on are the areas that we didn't get to. Some of the neighborhood focus areas that we've talked about include those neighborhoods in crisis where you have a higher incidence of graffiti and code and gang violence. And part of the argument is that you're not necessarily making a street-by-street finding of blight. You're making a finding of blight for the area, and you're making the argument that we need the tool of redevelopment for this area. And part of the argument we've made historically is that part of the reason we don't want to focus exclusively on only the absolute worst neighborhood is in order for us to bring the neighborhood up, we have to understand that we are that, and so that there's a connection between us. And the only neighborhood, as you know, that we've removed is Niagara Park, which we never argued was blighted because of its physical structure in the first place, but we had made that argument. They decided that they did not want to be a part of that argument, and we took them out. This time around, we're moving forward with the entire area, minus Niagara Park, to make the finding.